Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be ranking the studio albums of Dream Theater, including their new album, Parasomnia, from worst to best. Progressive metal legends Dream Theater have 16 studio albums in their catalog, so there's a lot to get to here. Let's get started. Coming in at number 16 from 2016, I'm going to go with the Astonishing. I don't think it gets more Dream Theater than writing a 2-hour concept album about a dystopian society ruled by electric music, but that sounds like something that only Rush can make sound cool, to be honest, and I, like a lot of people, have a love-hate relationship with The Astonishing. I want to like it, but why did the band have to make it so hard to like? It's definitely too far bloated. It should not be 2 hours long. It's self-indulgent at times as well. I think it's too ballad-heavy, which has never been an issue with Dream Theater. I think they make fantastic ballads, so that's something I didn't think I'd ever say. The lyrics here, mainly written by John Petrucci, are some of the weakest he's ever written, and the concept is just ridiculous. I rarely say that about a concept album, but, there's just so much here that could have been trimmed for fat, in my opinion. There's just no reason there should have been 34 songs on the record, and on an album that really goes nowhere. And I've tried with this album, and while I always enjoy the musicianship on display by the band, it's just impossible to sit through in its entirety. It's a chore to listen to, and I don't feel that way about any other Dream Theater album in their discography, so I have to put this one dead last. Coming in at number 16, I'm going to go with The Astonishing. Let's go all the way back to the beginning here with their debut album from 1989, When Dream and Day Unite. As far as debut albums go, this was nothing groundbreaking, but certainly not awful by any means, and I'm a fan of Charlie Dominici's vocals, or as I've heard him pronounce on some bootlegs, pronounce his own name, Charlie Dominici. This is the only studio album with him in the band, and I think he does a good job here. It's very obvious, though, the group were still, trying to figure things out, still growing as musicians 3 years into their formation, hadn't quite established their identity yet, and the album's biggest detractor, though, is its production, which just sounds too muddy, but, otherwise it has this interesting Queensryche vibe to it, I think, and I enjoy tracks on here, like A Fortune in Lies, The Killing Hand, and Only a Matter of Time. And it's definitely a far cry compositionally from what the band's best work would be in just a few short years, but I think bringing in James LaBrie to replace Charlie Dominici was definitely, what helped them take them to the next level, but the early stuff here with Charlie in the band is fine, solid stuff. Like I said, kind of give Queensryche vibes from it, but I enjoy it. A decent debut album, all things considered here. Not top shelf Dream Theater, but still I think it's fine for what it is. From 1989, my number 15 on the list. Gotta go with When Dream and Day Unite. Next, at number 14, let's go with A View from the Top of the World from 2021. I was very big into this album when it first came out, and I don't want to say I've soured on it since, but I've definitely cooled down on it a lot since 21, and this is the final album with Mike Mangini on the drums, and I had very high hopes for this record, when I first heard the single, The Alien, and then when the album came out, I thought it was solid stuff, nothing too unexpected or crazy for Dream Theater, but I dig other tracks on here, like Answering the Call, Invisible Monster, Awaken the Master, so there's some good stuff here, definitely. I do think the middle of the record kind of lags a little bit, which is, not something I usually say about Dream Theater, but then you have the album closer, the obligatory epic A View from the Top of the World, which, was a really strong track, but very much in line with, the band's formula for some of their more modern-day epics, and the only problem with that is the band seemed to follow similar structures for some of the album-closing epics, tracks like A View from the Top of the World and and Illumination Theory from Self-Titled to kind of blend together a bit, and thankfully the band broke that trend with all new fresh ideas on the Shadow Man incident from the new album, but in general, it's solid, I dig it, not top-shelf Dream Theater in my opinion, I liked it a lot more when it first came out, but now, a few years later, down towards the bottom of my list, A View from the Top of the World from 2021. Speaking of their self-titled album here from 2013, coming in at number 13 on the list, let's go with Dream Theater, the second album from the Mike Mangini era, and, the band definitely wanted to drive home the fact that, this was a new era for the band, and that it was definitely, not so subtle with the self-titled name, but with the exception of the 22-minute Illumination Theory, most of the material on here is shorter compared to what we've become accustomed to, and Mike Mangini definitely had a lot more freedom on this record to do his own thing, also involved with the songwriting here as well, and Mike's a phenomenal drummer, and I think he did a great job in the band, of course having the massive shoes of Mike Portnoy to fill, but he really rose to the occasion here in my opinion, and while this album isn't top shelf Dream Theater for me, I still really enjoy tracks on here like The Looking Glass, The Enemy Inside, Behind the Veil, and Along for the Ride. I'm going to stick with the Mike Mangini era here and go to the beginning of that era with a dramatic turn of events from 2011 coming in at number 12. The first album of a new era, right? The first with Mike Mangini and, the first without longtime founding member and original drummer Mike Portnoy. And considering how much Portnoy had contributed to the group, not just from a drumming perspective, but also in his songwriting, his thematic leadership, and production production work. It was definitely going to be an uphill battle for the band to continue on business as usual in his absence, but the band were motivated to, reevaluate themselves and their sound, kind of restructure things on this record, with the idea being that the album wouldn't tell a thematic story, but rather be, an emotional roller coaster for the listener to go on, and I think it accomplishes that really well. I think the album has some incredible melodies that really make it for me, and some of the material on here is definitely influenced by some of their 90s work, like Images and Words and Metropolis Part 2, and some standouts here for me include On the Backs of Angels, Lost Not Forgotten, Outcry, Breaking All Illusions, and Beneath the Surface to close things out. Number 11, Distance Over Time from 2019. As much as I love proggy, epic Dream Theater, I think going shorter and more concise on this record after the overbloated Astonishing album was absolutely the right call to make. Nothing on the album goes over 10 minutes long, and the album is under an hour long as well, and it attacks with much more of, a tight and fresh urgency. Ideas don't feel scatterbrained or overindulgent amid a 2-hour, monstrous concept record, which was, I think, definitely the right call here, right? Great way to kind of change up the pace following the Astonishing, and all in all, I think it worked out, leading to some great songs on here, like Barstool Warrior, Pale Blue Dot, At Wit's End, and Paralyzed. Definitely my favorite record of the Mike Mangini era for sure. We break into the top 10 here with Systematic Chaos from 2007. It's a really well-structured album, bookended by In the Presence of Enemies Part 1 and 2, and Repentance is a really interesting track here with spoken word guest appearances by the likes of Corey Taylor, Michael Eicherfeld, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, John Anderson, Chris Jericho, and more, and one of those things is not like the other, but I love Ministry of Lost Souls and Forsaken. Dream Theater remained consistent with Systematic Chaos, but additionally the album had a bit of a modern edge to it at the time as well. Let's go back to 1994 here for my number 9. I'm going to go with Awake. Dream Theater here, waving the flag for progressive metal during the grunge-dominated era of rock in 94, and this was the last album to feature original keyboardist Kevin Moore, who, in my opinion, does some of his absolute finest work on this record. And listen, Jordan Rudess is great, right? But Moore brought so much atmosphere to the band's sound and was a great lyricist as well, so I really appreciate his work, and he goes out with some of his best stuff on this record, in my opinion, and I love the seamless blend here of heavy metal and progressive rock influences, and the band had been in an increasingly progressive direction right since the start, but this is the album where it all comes together, in my opinion, and even Chuck Schuldiner of Death remarked about the album that it was a great combination of, complex writing, but also with some great hooks. And some standouts include all 3 parts of A Mind Beside Itself. Rapping with Silent Man is great. You also have great tracks on here like The Mirror, Caught in a Web, and the Kevin Moore written Space Divest, and 6 O'Clock to bookend the record. Number 8, let's go with Parasomnia, well, from just a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact, their newest album here, and I wanted to wait until it came out before doing this ranking, and then give it a few weeks to let it sink in. I did talk more at length about Parasomnia. I did a full-length album review of it when it came out, which I'll leave linked down below if you want to check it out, but in my opinion, Parasomnia is far and away the band's best album since Black Clouds and Silver Linings of 2009. This is the reunion album with Mike Portnoy back behind the kit for Dream Theater, and with him came back elements of that classic Dream Theater sound and approach in the studio, and you can definitely hear the influence of the band's past works with Portnoy on this album, and it's the most energized I think the band have sounded in the studio in years, with standouts on here that I really enjoy, like Night Terror, A Broken Man, Dead Asleep, which in my opinion might be the best song the band have written in 15 years, just incredible stuff. Bend the Clock, fantastic ballad there. The Shadow Man Incident, great stuff. It really feels like Dream Theater were able to, no pun intended, bend the clock here on this record and pick up right where they left off with Portnoy, which is a great thing. And like I said before, I'm a big fan of Mike Mangini, but I think Portnoy's return was long overdue. Number 7, Falling Into Infinity from 1997, and I'm fully aware of how unpopular this album is, and this is the band feeling more pressure from the label to write more radio-friendly tracks, but allow me to gush about this album for a second. I absolutely love this record. I feel like if any other band had made this album in 97, it would have been much better received, but because of what Dream Theater had managed to build on their first 3 studio albums, it didn't get the appreciation I feel it deserved upon its release. It was a commercial failure for the band, which sucks because, I love tracks on here, like New Millennium, You Not Me, Peruvian Skies, Take Away My Pain, which is just a beautiful song, and Anna Lee as well. So it's the band's only studio album to feature keyboardist Derek Sheridan following the departure of Kevin Moore, and sure, it's not as proggy as the stuff that came before it or the stuff that came after it, and the band were definitely under a lot of stress and pressure by the label to write more commercial stuff, but I think a lot of the material in this album has aged really well, and it's wildly underrated by a lot of people in my opinion, so I wanted to make sure to include it in the top 10 for sure. Number 6, let's go with their sophomore album, Images and Words. It's pretty crazy to see how the band had grown and improved between their debut debut and second album, and this is the first full-length studio album in the Dream Theater catalog to feature James LaBrie's powerful vocals taking the helm, which, like I said, I think was a definite upgrade and definitely helped to get the band to the next level here. And just from top to bottom, this album is, really well layered, proggy, and, really helped the band to shift into that next gear. And of course, Pull Me Under was the big hit from this record. I've heard it to death, but it's still an amazing song every time you hear it, and a really great opener, I think, to the rest of this great record, including tracks on here like Another Day, Take the Time, Metropolis Part 1, Under a Glass Moon, Learning to Live as well. Some awesome songs on here. Not just one of the best progressive metal sophomore albums of all time, but an album that I think was super important in establishing, the Dream Theater sound and what fans could expect going forward. Top 5 here with Black Clouds and Silver Linings from 2009. This would be the last album to feature Mike Portnoy on drums until the recent Parasomnia. It's a really well-balanced album. The songs are well thought out and lengthy, and you have some great epics on here like The Count of Tuscany, The Best of Times. Love the lyrics on that one, and A Nightmare to Remember, and Wither is a great ballad. The Shattered Fortress is a great cut from the 12-step suite, and the album definitely has a bit of a dark vibe to it, and one that I don't think they were really able to capture well until Mike Portnoy returned. So nevertheless, Portnoy goes out here with a really strong album, and this, like I said, would be his last for 15 years in the band. For number 4, I'm going to go with 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence from 2002. Disc 1 is great. The band pursuing a bit of a heavier sound here that they continue to expand upon on Train of Thoughts, and you have the beginning of the 12-step suite with The Glass Prison. You got Blind Faith, Misunderstood, The Great Debate, which is, very Tool-esque, I think. Always thought that was kind of cool, and the band were continuing to evolve on this record, right? You have the band putting a higher emphasis on longer tracks with extended instrumental parts, and then you have the entirety of Disc 2, taken up by the incredibly well-composed title track. All 8 parts are amazing. You just have to sit back and listen to it in order. It's a journey, and all 42 minutes of it are worth the listen. It flies by, as a matter of fact, and the solo in Goodnight Kiss is one of my favorite in the band's entire catalog, and the lyrics on the entire second disc, I think, are amongst some of the best that the band have ever written, written primarily by Portnoy and Petrucci, and obviously the gargantuan title track overshadows the rest of this album, but it's pretty wild that with the exception of, The Glass Prison, the rest of Disc 1 is, just kind of full of great deep cuts, and there's definitely a ton to digest on this record. It's a bit of an overwhelming album, but breaking down both discs, this really feels like 2 different albums wrapped in one. For the top 3 here, let's get things started with Octavarium from 2006. This is an album full of some of the strongest melodies in the Dream Theater catalog, and the band set out with this record to create, in their words, a classic Dream Theater album, stripping down the sound to piano, guitar, and vocals and writing, focusing on the melodies and song structures, and I love the use of orchestra on here as well. Standouts on this album include The Root of All Evil, The Answer Lies Within, These Walls, I Walk Beside You, Panic Attack, Sacrifice Sons is great, and then of course Octavarium, the 24-minute title track, and the songwriting is so cool on the title track, as all 5 parts come full circle. Then the final few minutes is, in my opinion, one of the most satisfying compositions in the band's whole discography, so some tremendous writing on here, and I do love the approach the band took, whether or not you consider it to be a classic Dream Theater approach or not, but just the way that they stripped down the sound here to, like I said, the piano, guitar, and vocals makes for a great record here, and like I said, the melodies are tremendous. Number 2 is going to be Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory from 1999, and I'm always a sucker for a great concept album, and this is one of the best in metal history. The band took thematic influence from records like The Wall and The Final Cut by Pink Floyd, as well as The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Operation Mindcrime, and The Who's Tommy, just to name a few, and the concept is really cool, inspired as the sequel to the track Metropolis Part 1 from Images and Words. This is the first Dream Theater album with Jordan Rudess on keyboards, and he really had immediate chemistry with the band right away here, and of course the guitar work on this album is absolutely stellar, right? John Petrucci goes full David Gilmour on the solo to The Spirit Carries On, which is just one of the most beautiful songs ever written, and some other standouts here for me include Strange Deja Vu, Through My Words, Fatal Tragedy, Through Her Eyes, Home, The Dance of Eternity, One Last Time, like I mentioned, The Spirit Carries On, Finally Free to close things out. Really awesome album here. This record needs to be listened to in order, in my opinion, and for my money, it's one of the greatest progressive metal albums ever written, but there's just one other Dream Theater album that I'd rank a little higher as my personal favorite. And that one other album coming in at number 1 here is Train of Thought from 2003. The band had pursued a heavier sound on 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence and on the subsequent tour, and they decided to double down on that here with great results. This is an intense album with some standouts here like, This Dying Soul, As I Am, Endless Thoughts, right? Honor Thy Father, probably the heaviest song in the Dream Theater catalog, maybe. Vacant is great. Stream of Consciousness, great instrumental. In the Name of God, just a crushing album closer there. And, you know, one small detail I really love about this record is that the same chord that closed out 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence is what opens up the album. Dream Theater always great, does little attention to detail like that, you know, stuff like that. And it's the band's heaviest record for sure. And I think, you know, the heavier sound and the darker riffs really suited Dream Theater well on top of their progressive style. So for me, this is my personal favorite Dream Theater album of all time. Really heavy stuff. Love it. Love the lyrics. Love the production. Love the dark, heavy, crushing riffs. Just some fantastic stuff here by the band, going in a heavier direction, following up 6 Degrees. So for me, my favorite, got to go with Train of Thought from 2003. So that wraps up this ranking here, ranking the studio albums of Dream Theater from worst to best. You guys can see my list right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comment section below what are your thoughts on my list and what are some of your favorite Dream Theater albums of all time. I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.